Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third webinar of Sustainable Conservation's Recharging California webinar series. Thank you all for joining us today. We're thrilled to have our expert panelists with us. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Environmental Science Associates, Holland and Knight, and Spotswood Estate Vineyard and Winery for supporting our fall webinars and sharing Sustainable Conservation's vision of stewarding our most precious natural resources for all Californians. I'm Joe Choperena, Project Director of Water Resources on Sustainable Conservation's Water for the Future team. For those of you who don't know us, Sustainable Conservation advances the collaborative stewardship of California's land, air, and water for the benefit of nature and people. Every day, we take a big tent approach to bring together business, landowners, scientists, government, water agencies, nonprofits, and others to advance collaborative solutions to steward the natural resources we all depend on in ways that are just and make economic sense. Throughout our fall 2024 Recharging California series, Sustainable Conservation has explored how climate change is affecting California and what that means for water across the state. We've highlighted groundwater recharge as a vital tool in our climate adaptation toolkit and have discussed strategies to scale and incentivize recharge. If you missed the first two discussions, you can watch the recordings on our YouTube channel. Today, we'll focus on the importance of collaboration. We'll learn more about the work of some of Sustainable Conservation's closest partners and explore how we're working together to advance water resilience in California. I'll ask our expert panelists to introduce themselves shortly, and I'll ask them a handful of questions. We'll leave a few minutes at the end for audience questions, but you don't need to wait until that time to ask your questions. Please feel free at any time and enter those questions in the Q&A box that come to mind during the conversation, and we'll be sure to ask them at the end. Before I ask our panelists to introduce themselves, we'd like to quickly get to know all of you. We have a three-part poll asking where you're joining us from today, what sector you work in, and how you'd rate your level of knowledge on groundwater recharge. Please take a minute to answer the poll, and if you don't see your answer reflected, please feel free to type it into the chat.
Mostly Bay Area.
Looks like there might have been a technical glitch, but if you restart the poll, you should be able to answer the questions there. How is a good question. If my colleague Hannah can answer that, that would be great. And where is the poll? The poll should just show up on the screen. Okay. So if you're not on the Zoom desktop app, you might not get the poll. we'll go ahead and give this another minute or so. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start reading off some responses here. It looks like we've got most people that are on the call today on the webinar are from the Sacramento Valley, about 38%, followed by the Bay Area, and the San Joaquin Valley is kind of the next highest percentages, as well as some up in Northern California, inland and coast, as well as about 8% in Southern California and about 8% out of state. And almost half of our participants represent government, about 20% in the nonprofit sector, and about 13% in agriculture and 8% in academia, as well as a few percentages of philanthropy and foundation, and one student. And as far as your level of knowledge on groundwater recharge, there's about 70% consider themselves average knowledge of groundwater recharge, 24% as beginner, and 5% are experts, which is great. We're used to presenting and working with a diverse demographic of all knowledge levels, so we'll be sure to really speak in layman's terms and describe as much as we can. But again, feel free to ask any questions or put any questions into the chat. All right. With that, I'd go ahead and like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. And why don't we go ahead and start with Paul? Paul Boyer, do you mind introducing yourself for a couple minutes?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Paul Boyer. I uh, worked for many years for self-help enterprises, about 40 years in self-help enterprises as a service area from Kern County on the south, now up to San Joaquin County. Worked in the community development department where we worked with small rural communities that had water, wastewater issues, helping them get funding from state and federal sources to build and improve water and sewer systems. And along the way, especially when the drought came 10 years ago, realized there's a lot of issues, not just with quality, but issues with lowering groundwater levels, and helped with a lot of communities that had dry wells. The other thing I'm involved in, I've been on the city council in Farmersville, that's in Tulare County, in southern Tulare County, for a little over 20 years, and been involved in water issues there too, serving on the GSA board.
Great, thank you, Paul. And we look forward to hearing more about you and your important work here in a second. Jim, do you mind introducing yourself?
Good morning, and thanks, Joe. My name is Jim Wieking. I'm with California Department of Water Resources, and I'm in the Division of Planning. And I work in a group that has been focused on a concept that we call flood managed aquifer recharge. And it's just basically, looking at recharge opportunities associated with relatively higher flow conditions.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a question for both Jim and Paul, just a general question, and then we'll dive into some more detailed questions for either Jim or Paul specifically. So this first question is, can you describe what collaboration looks like in your organizations? And why don't we go ahead and start with Jim?
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna talk about two parts of what we do related to collaboration and the FloodMAR program broadly. First of all, in technical assistance, we've we worked on some guidance documents with sustainable conservation. Those are available on the Sustainable Conservation website. There's one about how to do district recharge. There's one on incentives and strategies. There's one on methods. And then there's also one on case studies. And we think that these guidance documents are real hands-on helpful tools for hopefully getting folks moving in the right direction. And then another thing that we've been involved in the technical assistance area is with support from consultants and NGOs like Sustainable Conservation, MBK Engineers. We've provided pilot project technical assistance more broadly, including in things like pilot projects, permitting assistance, especially for temporary permits, the groundwater recharge assessment tool, which is a tool developed by Sustainable Conservation for local applications at districts. And then we've also supported we've also investigated and we're exploring floodplain recharge concepts. And then for the watershed studies, for the San Joaquin Floodmar watershed studies, which I lead, if it's okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen.
Sure, please do.
Let's see here. All right. Can folks see that?
Yes.
Okay, this is our geographic location of our San Joaquin watershed studies. And you can see that we're studying 5 watersheds, Calaveras, Stanislaus, Tuolumne, Merced, and then Upper San Joaquin. And then in Upper San Joaquin, there's actually 3 reservoirs there, one on the Chachilla River, the Fresno River, and the Upper San Joaquin. And those studies are broadly looking at, how can we do this? How could we do recharge kind of at scale? So these are mature versions of if we did this in a kind of a program way and at the watershed scale, what would it look like? And so that's the technical effort that we're engaged in there. We work both with local district partners, local and regional partners. You can see the 5 watersheds here. We've got a list of local partners, and they include irrigation districts, some flood entity, and some cities, a city and county in one of the watersheds. And then regional partners, we have U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, United States Army Corps of Engineers, and then the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes has specific expertise in forecast-informed reservoir operations, which we are exploring as part of these studies. And then from a technical side, we have a project team that includes consultants and NGOs. So you can see there the logos of those folks. And some of these names have already been mentioned. So Department of Water Resources is leading this technical team. And the focus of that team is really to kind of broadly, one of our ambitions with this study effort has been to look at our watersheds in a multi-sector way. And so we're trying to assess for flood risk, ecosystems, and water supply. And the this technical team is really significantly connected to helping us to assess and then be able to describe what's happening in each one of those water management sectors. In order to do that, we have a integrated tool set. So we've got rainfall runoff models, which we modify using climate change, climate change tool. And then we've got, let's see if I can, no, it's not it. We've got a reservoir operations model that looks at both water supply and flood operations. We've got a recharge tool up here in the upper right corner. That's the groundwater recharge assessment tool, developed and evaluated using by the Sustainable Conservation. And then we've got a groundwater model. So we have what we call a headwater to groundwater tool set. And we're really looking at the whole watershed. We're looking across the 3 water management sectors, trying to, one of our goals is to communicate to each one of the water management sectors in a way that makes sense for them. And then we're also trying to create a set of analytics and outcomes that are meaningful to each one of those water management sectors. So when we ultimately produce our results, they can be a shared result. So they're using all the same hydrology. They're looking at results for their sector and the other sectors. So the assessments are for flood, like I said, water supply, both surface and groundwater, and then ecosystems. And if we can get to a point where folks can feel like they understand what's happening with their water management sector, and then all that they're most concerned about, and then the other water management sectors as well, we think that's a great outcome. Like I said, we're trying to illustrate how recharge at scale, at the watershed scale, what it can look like, and then the planning team and the technical foundation has allowed us to demonstrate a number of important concepts. Like I said, they're at watershed scale, and so we're not just looking at farms or even districts, we're looking at the whole watershed. And then we're doing multi-sector assessments. We're looking at climate change vulnerability. So our foundational assessment is of climate change vulnerability to each one of those water management sectors. And then we're looking at, how might a mature program of recharge, what might it look like for an entire watershed? And maybe I'll leave it off there, and we can come back if you have any additional questions.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jim. And what Jim just described is a partnership that our groundwater recharge assessment tool team, which is also a partnership with the Earth Genome and another NGO partner of ours who co-developed that decision support tool. And just to mention, Jim did mention a few other documents that we've also developed with DWR, and we can either send the links out in the chat or in a follow-up email if you'd like to take a look at those. But there was a district recharge guidance document looking at how water districts can develop and implement groundwater recharge projects with a particular emphasis on multi-benefit recharge. as well as an on-farm recharge methods manual and case studies, which really highlights our grower partners who implement on-farm recharge, how they implement it, how much water they apply and when, on what types of crops and what soil types. So really highlighting how growers implement on-farm recharge on their properties, as well as a groundwater recharge incentives and strategies document, which documented how water districts and groundwater sustainability agencies, what types of recharge programs and strategies they offered to growers in their districts so that other districts can kind of learn about what's been offered and how that might be able to work in their particular subbasin. So thank you so much for that, Jim. And I'm sure we'll dive into that in more detail here in a bit. Paul, I'll go ahead and remind you of this question. It is, can you describe what collaboration looks like in your organization and self-help enterprise?
Okay, well, I'll say that, the primary collaboration we have is working with representatives of rural communities. Oftentimes they're board members of like a community services district, sanitary district, PUD, or maybe a mutual water company. And we're there helping provide technical assistance to them to help solve whatever those water issues are, if possible, if you could help them, find a source of funding, and then go through that whole process of, um, you know, looking for help selecting consultants at times, and often at times that's an engineer, hydrogeologist. They need legal assistance. Also, helping, working with all the funding agencies. And then there's other nonprofits too that get involved. And I know years ago, I know United Farm Workers Union used to have representatives come to the meetings. Martha Guzman, who's now Martha Guzman Aceves, who's the Region 9 administrator for EPA, and then also, Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, they've been involved, Center for Race, Poverty, Environment. And so, it's kind of a collection of efforts from the different NGOs, and we're one of them helping these communities go through the process, and then also working with the funding agencies and helping, uh, the community representatives, which oftentimes are, people on a board that, might not have passed a high school diploma. They may only have part-time assistants, a part-time maintenance person, part-time bookkeeper that collects the water bills. And so, yeah, it takes a whole lot of collaboration there to help go through what is not an easy process and a long process.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I really look forward to kind of diving in deeper with some specific examples of communities that you've worked with and how self-help and sustainable conservation are going to be working together and are working currently together on a project. Quick follow-up question for both of you, and we could start with Jim again on this one, but what value does your organization see in collaborative partnerships, and how might that have helped lead to innovation?
Yeah, so going back to the model tool set. So these models, they're fully integrated. Like I said, headwaters to groundwater. And so basically data from one model, we have 100-year hydrologic data sets that are, rainfall runoff based on rainfall runoff models. And then that is passed to a reservoir operations model and maybe irrigation district delivery systems. And then the recharge tool, so the ResOps tool passes information to the recharge tool, and then the recharge tool passes information to the groundwater tool. So you can see how the team has to work together to understand what's happening in all the different water management sectors. And one of the things we found is that, different tools speak more to different folks. So the ResOps tool speaks to flood managers because we've included the flood operations. We have a 3-hour time step in our ResOps tool. And so we can illustrate what's happening, what is happening in the current system, what is the climate vulnerability to floods. And then we also have water management operations, in-stream flow operations of the reservoir. So all the operations of the reservoir are built in. And that, so that's, that speaks to the res operators also. The groundwater model speaks to the groundwater sustainability agencies and all the other folks concerned about the sustainability of groundwater. The recharge tool speaks to a very important group of folks, and those are mainly landowners, farmers specifically. And we found out really quickly when we first started doing these studies. We did a pilot study first. We have a report out of that pilot in Merced. And we found out quickly that the recharge tool really speaks to farmers. When you inform them that the way the tool is set up is to make sure that their operations are all respected within the way the tool works, and the health of their crops is a priority in the way that the tool delivers water throughout their the irrigation system. That's an important way to bring those interests to the table. Another thing that was done by the groundwater team and the recharge team is the recharge tool in its original form is designed to kind of maximize recharge. And so it looks at things like soil, it looks at the aquifer underneath, it looks at crop type, and it creates a crop calendar for how long you can recharge water on cropland. And so it's trying to figure out, where can we put the water to get the water into the aquifer most quickly. But after some conversations with the groundwater team and the recharge team, we asked the question, hey, can we get to specific outcomes by emphasizing water to specific locations? And we found out the answer was yes. And we found out with a little bit of testing back and forth between the recharge team and the groundwater team that we could get some specific outcomes. And those specific outcomes that we're trying to get to are aquifer in basin retention, groundwater dependent ecosystems, disadvantaged communities, and subsidence. So what the GRAT now does, the GRAT application that's being used in the watershed studies, what it now does is it emphasizes, rather than maximizing recharge, just get it in as fast as possible, max as possible, it emphasizes getting water to locations that will get specific outcomes. So we're able to see a little bit better improvements for mitigating the effects of subsidence, keeping water within the basin, elevating water levels near disadvantaged communities, and elevating levels near groundwater dependent ecosystems. So that was a great innovation that the team kind of worked on together that we think again can paint a picture for here's what you can do. You can, I call it, and forgive me for using the term this way, but I call it, if you stack water, if you emphasize getting water, and the GRAT tool enables us to do that, in certain locations, you can get certain outcomes. And that's what we saw when we saw results from our groundwater model.
Thank you, Jim. That
Yeah.
was loaded with good information
Yeah.
that hopefully we have time to get back to. But just to touch on some
Okay.
things that you mentioned, like reservoir reoperations, which just to kind of simplify it for our audience here, is really kind of utilizing our more advanced and sophisticated weather and storm tracking systems to either release or hold back water behind our reservoirs for more strategic usage of recharge downstream from the rivers, as opposed to using traditional flood release curves where you might miss opportunities to be able to store that water for future use. And also the recharge management areas, really important of targeting flood release water and surface water to specific areas to address really to address specific concerns, whether that be groundwater resiliency for disadvantaged communities, groundwater dependent ecosystems, or subsidence. So a ton of really great work is coming out of the watershed studies, and we look forward to seeing those results. The Merced watershed studies results are available to the public, but the other ones once they're ready to be released. So thanks again, Jim. And then Paul, and I'll remind you of this question again. What value does self-help enterprise see in collaborative partnerships, and how might have that led to innovation?
Okay, well, I will be answering your question, but also I'd like to pick up maybe a little bit where Jim left off on a
Please
specific
do.
example, and maybe have another example later on. But yeah, definitely, we and the communities we work with can learn from others, and whether it's pilot study or other programs that have been done and projects. And what I'd like to do right now is share. Excuse me, my phone's ringing, but I'm going to ignore that. Okay, but I'd like to share the screen on a project that is just been done. And actually it's been for several years in the making. And what this is uh, the town I live in, Farmersville, we're considered a severely disadvantaged community. We're just over 10,000 population. So when Jim was talking about DACs or disadvantaged communities, well, this is a project that, and a series of projects actually, that the Kaweah Delta Water Conservation District applied for funds and built and is continuing to do. And I don't know if you could see the arrow I have here, but oh great, okay, this is Deep Creek, and the upstream is here to the right. It goes through a check structure here, which holds water back into these ponds, which is called the Peregrine Basins, and then continues on down into Farmersville. And this creek is flooded in our city before. And also, this is a major source of groundwater recharge for our city wells. And so this particular part of the project you see here are phases 1 and 2 of the Peregrine Basin that the Water District built, that are roughly 100 acres of ponds, and annually the estimated average recharge is about 3,700 acre feet. And so that definitely is helping our water in our city. As an example, the city pumps out a little over 1,000 acre feet a year. So it's definitely more than what, the city wells need, but it helps maintaining levels and also helps with water quality. This is excellent water quality from the Kaweah River, which is off the Sierra Nevada. And then I want to show another slide here of this. Yeah, this was back in a little over a year ago, March of 2023, when the city of Visalia near us was anticipating they may get some flooding from a new storm coming in, because the dam, Terminus Dam above us, was Kauai Reservoir was full, so all water going in was going out. And so we definitely were very concerned about what was going to happen in our city. And you know, this is what the creek looked like coming into our city. And so families were out, and Public Works was out, firefighters were out filling sandbags, getting ready for the worst. And fortunately, the storm shifted a little, and you know, we did not get flooded, but you know, and we're very, you know, but you know, we don't know what's going to come in the future with climate change. You know, you notice the Sierra um, snowpack that was up there. Well, if there was more warmer precipitation and less snowpack, that could really have devastating consequences. So it's great that this work here takes off that peak flow. And there's a new, actually MLRP funded project, 70 acres, the walnuts that were purchased to take, which is those walnuts have been taken out now. That saves about 300 acre feet a year of water that's not pumped, that's upstream of our city. And they're going to build 55 acres of recharge basins. And so by the time they're done, with all of those previous and the new basin going in, they're estimating they're going to be able to have an average recharge of about 4,600 acre feet a year, which is great for us and the surrounding area. Another project that's just upstream of that is at the Kauai Oaks Preserve, that's maintained by Sequoia Riverlands Trust. And they actually have had a temporary pump that they've rented when there's been high rainfalls, and pumped water out into the land there, which I think has taken about a half a foot a day of recharge. And here's another photo of it showing like the water coming in and spreading out. At that time, it was going over about 20 acres. There's funding now that's available to put a permanent pump in, and will also spread out much more to help with that situation. So again, it's working with not only government agencies, but other you know, conservation groups like Kauai Oaks Preserve. And again, I'd like to later on talk about a project that's helped in another community called Okieville with water quality.
That's
And
great. That's great, Paul. And for those of us who have seen photos or seen actual like dedicated recharge basins, what you just showed are what we would describe as kind of habitat friendly recharge basins, where you're getting recharge, but there's vegetation and wildlife, and it really provides an ecosystem service and habitat for, you know, whether it's birds or wildlife. So that's really awesome. And you also mentioned the multi-benefit land repurposing program, which is a very important program that we also work very closely with. And for those of you who might not have heard of MLRP or the multi-benefit land repurposing program, it's basically through the Department of Conservation. There's been 2 years of funding, and I want to say 8 or 9 different subbasins or groundwater sustainability agencies have received funding to, and these are in subbasins with overdraft, where there's more pumping than the water that's replenishing them, and where there's going to have to be, there's not enough water to maintain the same agricultural productivity. And so there's repurposing those lands to other land uses that have benefits. And Paul mentioned some recharge basins. So, so thank you so much for those examples, Paul. That was great. Let's go ahead, and I've got a question here for Jim of how can DWR, the Department of Water Resources, continue to partner with consultants and NGOs, nonprofit organizations, to implement the floodmark concept?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. I think we've I think we've demonstrated the usefulness of these collaborative efforts. The technical team that I keep referring to of our watershed studies, outstanding group of folks, really creative, really technically competent. So we have, some of the flood experts in the state, some of the groundwater experts in the state, water supply operations experts in the state, and then bringing on the GRAT team, Sustainable Conservation, Earth Genome. They get out there with the district. They have these districts delivery systems fully mapped in their recharge tool. So it's a really detailed assessment that we're doing, kind of current conditions, and then, how can recharge improve things for them. We think we've demonstrated with this great group of folks how the potential for what can be done. Again, getting to implementation is going to be very challenging, but we think the way we're going to depict the opportunity, and that once folks see all the outcomes that we're seeing in our results, we're bringing all the results together now. It's I was going to show you a slide that talks about the number of results, all the different metrics we're looking at for the different water management sectors. And one of our metrics guy gave us some of the total number of data points that are included in our results. 8.3 million across the 5 watersheds, assessing, flood performance, water supply performance, groundwater, and ecosystems. So we think this effort is going to be a great foundation for potentially moving to, okay, now how do we grow these things to scaled implementations? And we think it may be part of, San Joaquin's in particular sustainability and resilient strategy for the future. And then we also think that we can expand this into other parts of the state as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jim. There's so many good kind of nuggets out of those watershed studies that will help inform water districts, and really looking at future water management use up in the Sacramento Valley also. I want to, before we hand it over to questions from the audience, I definitely want Paul to be able to elaborate a little bit more. You mentioned Okieville, another disadvantaged community that you and Self-Help Enterprises has worked with. And when you talk about that, I'd also like for you to kind of talk about how these strategies and solutions used in the examples of Farmersville, how that might be able to be used in other communities as well.
Yeah, sure. Sure, Joe. And yeah, and I first I'm going to share a picture here that shows it's an aerial of the community of Okieville, which oh, wait a minute, I got to hit the word share. Okay, now I hope you can see that now.
Yes.
Okay, and here here's the community of Okieville. It's about 100 homes. It was settled back in the 30s and 40s, obviously from people that came from the Dust Bowl. And by the way, the community voted if they want to keep that name, and they said yes. And so it's about 100 homes here, very poor area. A lot of people here work in the fields. Nearby, there's a dairy. And you can see in the background there, that water, which is a pretty big basin that is owned by the Kauai Delta Water Conservation District, that's been operated since the 1950s for water storage and incidentally recharge by the Tulare Irrigation District. And this, kind of unbeknownst to the people in the community, was actually having a lot of beneficial uh, side effects to their water wells. Further to the 3 miles to the west is city of Tulare. And on that side of Tulare, all the wells that are shallow aquifer, like above the cork and clay, like the domestic wells are here, have high nitrates, high uranium. We go a few miles down to Wieking, really high levels of nitrates and uranium. And then when we sampled in the community, when they had water before the drought in 2015 or so, they had good quality water and it tasted good and everybody was very happy with it. Unfortunately, the drought came along for like 2 or 3 years. That basin was not filled, and one by one, wells were going dry in the community. And eventually we worked with them. DWR was definitely involved in getting the funding, along with USDA, to put in a water system. And so there's a water system serving the community, but there's also private wells that some people are still on that have come back. Um, the point I'm trying to get at here is that this information we shared with Aaron Fukuda, who's the manager of the Tulare Irrigation District, and we were asking for some more information. He says, "Wow, that's really good," and we could show that the closer you are to the pond down there, the lower your nitrate and uranium levels are, and the further away we got. And then when we got up to the northern end here, it was just like everywhere else. Like it was like maybe 1.5 times the maximum contaminant level for those contaminants. And so on their own, the Tulare Irrigation District decided they wanted to help. And so they contacted the owner, the Fagundes family. This is about a 20-acre recharge basin that took a lot of effort and took a few years. And this basin now is operating. They're getting water off the Tulare Irrigation District canal here. And they're going to be monitoring the water in the community here. They're also going to be monitoring the water in between for water levels and water quality. And going back to your original question, this information is going to be shared with the community of Fairmead up in Madera County that, self-help is working with sustainable conservation, which sustainable conservation is working with the local nonprofit there called Fairmead Community and Friends. And so this is, one example that the people in Fairmead can see to see if, this is something that maybe they could encourage some of their neighboring farmers to look at this, working with either the Madera Irrigation District or the Chowchilla Irrigation District for the water that would be needed. But see, maybe that could help with the issues they're having there, because they have community wells that, they had one go dry. They have a newer one now. They need another second good source, and they need to keep that water level up, and they need to keep the quality good. So just this is an example that might be hopefully replicated other places.
Great job, Paul. Thank you so much for adding so much insight there and connecting the dots with Fairmead, which, as you mentioned, is a project that Sustainable Conservation, Self-Help, Madera County, Fairmead Community and Friends, and several others are working on. And to tie it to the multi-benefit land repurposing program, Madera County, their groundwater sustainability agency, does have an MLRP program. We actually have a workshop this Saturday at Fairmead to, talk to landowners and community members about what they want to do and how some lands around Fairmead could potentially be repurposed and ideally, have some recharge benefits, since they do have domestic wells that have gone dry and one of their community wells has gone dry, as you mentioned. So thanks again, Paul. That was amazing. So we only have about 8 minutes left. I would love to kind of open it up to any questions from audience members. If there are any, or if anyone has any questions, please feel free to chime in. And I'm looking to see if there are any chat. Okay. I don't see any specific questions in the chat. If well, we can continue the conversation, and if anyone does, please feel free to either come off mute or submit your questions in the chat. So I guess on the same lines, so Paul, there's several hundred disadvantaged communities in the San Joaquin Valley alone, and hundreds up in the Sacramento Valley also. You've mentioned Farmersville, Okieville, and Fairmead. Are there any other communities that self-help is working with regarding, water resiliency in particular, but any other projects?
Well, first, I have to admit, I've been retired for 3.5 years from the full-time work here, so I'm not up on all the current projects. But unfortunately, a lot of projects that got started 5 years ago still may not be done. And so, there, I most of the work we've done is working with water quality issues that communities have for their community water systems and helping them get another source or look at treatment. Sometimes water supply is also the issue. Um, there it is relatively new to look at, tying in groundwater recharge to this. And there's other examples of where groundwater recharge has helped with water quality. We're working with a little community called Elm Court Water System that's north of Easton, that's outside of Fresno, and that little water system had high nitrates, maybe double the maximum contaminant level of 20 instead of 10, and the Fresno Irrigation District put in a recharge basin years ago, and gradually the nitrate levels went down in that community well, and actually they're way below the health standard now, and so that has really helped. And so I think there needs to be more projects like that. I'm hoping that if there's more possibilities of getting conveyance through canals, that the siting of those canals can be upstream, up gradient of disadvantaged communities and other water systems that are either our community wells or private wells that are usually much shallower. So I would just say that, there's a lot more that could be done, and hopefully it is going to get done.
Great, thank you. We have a few minutes left, and there is one more question I'd like to ask both Jim and Paul. And Jim, if you want to start off, what is one thing that makes you hopeful about working on water in California?
I mean, I would I would say that the thing that makes me most hopeful are that there are a lot of really thoughtful, creative people, and that we seem to be moving in a direction that is holistic, comprehensive, also local. So there's kind of a tension there. Some of the solutions that DWR is looking at are obviously much bigger in scale, but those need to be paired appropriately with local solutions. And so, again, a lot of great folks. Our watershed studies have really demonstrated that. Our local partners, regional partners, and then our technical team are all great strategic thinkers and innovators, and I think that the care and concern that folks have is going to move us in the right direction.
Thanks, Jim. Paul, what's something that makes you hopeful about working in water in California?
Well, with drinking water for communities, which is the main thing that, I've worked with and am interested in, the state, has, made a commitment through the State Water Resource Control Board, the SAFER program to, really emphasize prioritizing funding for projects, finding solutions. Money doesn't always solve problems though. And it's definitely needed, but oftentimes there's a lot of, when you talk about collaboration, oftentimes with multiple districts with maybe different priorities that need to do, say, consolidation of water systems, and that's not always easy. But I think that as long as there's the making that a high priority in the state and continuing to have a funding stream to solve these problems with, that makes me helpful. And just one other thing, I know when I started back in the 70s, we were worried about contaminants that were in the parts per million. Then later on, it went to parts per billion, and now some parts per trillion. And so if we're getting rid of a lot of the ones that are in the parts per million, we're making progress. So
Definitely. Thank you so much. And I'll answer that question real quickly from my perspective. Like, just the amount of progress that's been made since the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act 10 years ago was implemented, just better science to improve our water management and understanding of our soils and geology and whatnot. And also like just ownership by community members, growers, landowners, really wanting to be part of the solution and really kind of being implementing and doing projects on their own and with others, and diverse organizations really working together. So we're out of time here, so I just kind of want to wrap this up. I really want to appreciate Jim and Paul for participating in the panel today, and for all of you for joining us. And we greatly appreciate you taking the time. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we'll be sending the recording soon in case you missed anything or would like to revisit this discussion. The fourth and final webinar in our Recharging California series will be in early December, and it will feature a few of Sustainable Conservation's program leads to discuss how each of our programs integrate and complement one another as we work towards ensuring a climate resilient future for all Californians. We'll announce the date and send the registration in the next few weeks. And if you'd like to follow Sustainable Conservation's work, please find us on social media, subscribe to our email list, or consider a donation. These webinars and our program work are fueled by the generous contributions of organizations and individuals like you. All new and increased donations are currently being matched dollar for dollar, so please consider donating by visiting to suscon.org/give or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again in our fall series. Thanks everyone, and have a great day. Thanks again, Paul and Jim.